The grinding screech of wood against stone ripped through the humid afternoon air, and Olivia Brennan felt her stomach drop as the Missouri riverboat lurched sideways, throwing passengers across the deck like scattered dominoes. She grabbed for the railing, but her gloved fingers slipped on the polished wood, and suddenly she was falling, her blue traveling dress tangling around her legs as water rushed up to meet her with shocking coldness. The year was 1881, and the mighty Missouri River had been her passage west from St. Louis to the Montana Territory, where her uncle's ranch supposedly waited with the promise of a fresh start after her father's death had left her penniless in the city. But now the riverboat had struck the shallows somewhere in the Dakota Territory, and the promise of a new life was rapidly turning into the threat of a premature death. She broke the surface gasping, her heavy skirts dragging her down like iron weights. The current was stronger than she had imagined, pulling her away from the listing boat where other passengers clung to the railings and screamed for help. Her arms flailed uselessly against the water, her lungs burning as she went under again, swallowing a mouthful of muddy river water that tasted of silt and fear. This could not be how it ended, drowning in an anonymous stretch of river miles from anywhere, her dreams sinking with her into the murky depths. Then strong hands grabbed her under the arms, hauling her upward with such force that she gasped in pain and relief simultaneously. Her head broke the surface, and she sucked in air, coughing and sputtering as someone towed her toward the shore with powerful strokes. She could barely see through the water streaming from her hair into her eyes, but she felt the solid strength of whoever had jumped in after her, felt the steady rhythm of his swimming even as he pulled her dead weight through the current. Her feet touched bottom first, scraping against smooth river stones, and then he was lifting her, carrying her through the shallows and up onto the muddy bank where he set her down gently on a patch of grass. She collapsed onto her hands and knees, retching up river water while her entire body shook with cold and shock. A warm hand pressed against her back, steadying her, and a low voice said, "Easy now, just breathe. You are safe now." When she could finally lift her head, she found herself looking into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. The man crouched beside her was perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair plastered to his head from the river, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He wore the rough clothes of a working cowboy, denim trousers and a cotton shirt that clung to his broad shoulders, and his weathered face held an expression of genuine concern that made something in her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you," she managed to gasp out between coughs. "You saved my life." "Could not very well let you drown," he replied, and despite the gravity of the situation, there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "Name is Zachary Fletcher. Most folks call me Zach. Olivia Brennan." She pushed her soaking hair back from her face with trembling hands, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must look, how her dress clung to her in all the wrong ways. "I do not know how to repay you. No repayment needed." He stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet with an easy strength that suggested he was accustomed to hard physical work. "But we need to move. The riverboat is going down fast, and we are a long way from any town." She turned to look back at the river, and her heart sank. The boat had tilted dangerously to one side, half submerged on the sandbar that had caught it. Other passengers were making their way to shore, some swimming, others being helped by crew members, but the vessel itself was clearly beyond saving. Her trunk was on that boat, containing everything she owned in the world, the few precious belongings she had managed to keep after her father's debts had claimed their house in St. Louis. "My things," she whispered, but Zachary was already shaking his head. "Nothing on that boat worth your life," he said firmly. "Come on. My horse is up in those trees. We need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch your death." He was right, of course. She was already shivering despite the summer heat, her wet clothes stealing the warmth from her body. She let him guide her up the riverbank, her sodden skirts heavy and awkward, her kid leather boots squelching with every step. In the shade of a cottonwood grove, a large buckskin horse waited patiently, its reins looped over a low branch. The animal nickered softly as they approached, and Zachary ran a reassuring hand down its neck. "This is Buck," he said. "He will carry us both. I have a camp about 5 miles north of here, near a trading post. It is not much, but there is a fire and some dry blankets." "I cannot impose," Olivia began, but he cut her off with a look that brooked no argument. "Miss Brennan, you are soaking wet, you have no supplies, and the sun will be setting in a few hours. Out here, pride can kill you just as surely as drowning. Now, I am offering you shelter for the night, and tomorrow we can figure out where you were headed and how to get you there. But tonight, you need to get warm and dry." "Understood," she nodded mutely, too exhausted and cold to argue further. He swung up into the saddle with fluid grace, then reached down for her. She grasped his forearm and let him pull her up behind him, settling awkwardly onto the horse's broad back. There was no side saddle, of course, so she had to sit astride, her wet skirts bunching up around her knees in a way that would have scandalized the ladies of St. Louis society. But they were not in St. Louis anymore, and propriety seemed like a small concern when measured against survival. "Hold on to me," Zachary said over his shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his wet shirt. He clucked to the horse, and they moved forward at an easy walk, leaving the chaos of the wrecked riverboat behind them. The ride through the Dakota Territory landscape was both beautiful and alien to Olivia's city-bred eyes. Rolling grasslands stretched in every direction, broken by occasional stands of trees and the glittering ribbon of the river. The sky overhead was impossibly vast, a dome of blue that seemed to go on forever, and the only sounds were the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, the whisper of wind through the grass, and the occasional call of a bird. It was so different from the crowded, noisy streets of St. Louis that she felt as though she had stepped into another world entirely. Zachary rode in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, not the awkward kind that demanded filling with meaningless chatter. She found herself acutely aware of the play of muscles in his back, the warmth of his body seeping into her cold skin, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to him. He had risked his own life to save hers without hesitation, diving into dangerous water for a complete stranger, and she wondered what kind of man did such things so casually, as though heroism were simply another part of his daily routine. "What were you doing at the river?" she asked finally, curiosity overcoming her exhaustion. "Watering my horse," he replied. "I have been trailing a small herd of cattle north to sell. Stopped to let Buck drink and rest when I heard the boat hit the shallows. Saw you go into the water and reacted without thinking much about it." "Thank goodness you were there," she said softly. "I cannot swim if you had not come in after me." "But I did," he interrupted gently. "No point dwelling on what might have been. You are alive, and that is what matters." His camp, when they reached it, was exactly as he had described. Simple but functional. A small fire ring made of river stones, a bedroll laid out on a canvas ground cloth, saddle bags hanging from a tree branch, and a lean-to shelter made of branches and an oiled tarp. It was the camp of a man who traveled light and lived rough, but there was an orderliness to it that spoke of competence and self-sufficiency. Zachary dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. She stumbled slightly as her feet hit the ground, her legs stiff from the cold and the ride, and he caught her elbow to steady her. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, guiding her to a log positioned near the cold ashes. "I will get it going again and find you something dry to wear." "You do not need to," she began, but he gave her that same firm look. "Miss Brennan, you need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. I have got an extra shirt and some trousers that will be too large for you, but they are dry and clean. Your modesty will be preserved, I promise. I will step away while you change." He was right again, infuriatingly right. Her dress was still soaked through, and the summer evening was beginning to cool as the sun sank lower. She nodded reluctantly, and he quickly rebuilt the fire, coaxing flames from the embers with practiced ease. Then he rummaged in his saddle bags and pulled out a clean cotton shirt and a pair of denim trousers, along with a woolen blanket. "There is a spot behind those bushes where you can change in private," he said, pointing to a thick stand of wild roses a short distance away. "Take your time. I will turn my back and tend to Buck." Olivia took the clothes and the blanket, her face burning with embarrassment despite his matter-of-fact tone. She had never undressed anywhere but in the privacy of a proper bedroom, and certainly never contemplated wearing men's clothing, but she could feel the wet fabric clinging to her skin, sapping her strength with every passing minute. Behind the shelter of the rose bushes, she struggled out of her sodden dress, corset, and multiple petticoats, her fingers fumbling with the buttons and laces. Her undergarments were just as wet, and she reluctantly stripped down to her bare skin before pulling on the borrowed clothes. Zachary's shirt hung on her like a tent, the sleeves extending well past her hands, and the trousers required her to roll up the legs several times before her feet emerged. She used her hair ribbon to cinch the waistband tight enough to keep them from falling down, then wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. Her wet hair hung in tangles down her back, and she had no comb or pins to put it up properly, so she simply twisted it into a loose braid and let it hang over one shoulder. When she emerged from behind the bushes, Zachary had his back turned as promised, stirring something in a small pot suspended over the fire. He glanced over his shoulder as she approached, and something flickered in his gray eyes, an expression she could not quite read before he turned his attention back to his cooking. "That is better," he said. "Come sit by the fire and get warm. I am heating up some coffee and beans. It is not fancy, but it will fill your stomach." She settled onto the log again, closer to the fire this time, and felt the blessed heat beginning to seep into her bones. The blanket smelled like wood smoke and something else, something indefinably masculine and not unpleasant. She watched Zachary work, noting the economical efficiency of his movements, the way he seemed completely at ease in this rough camp that was worlds away from anything she had ever known. "Where were you headed?" he asked as he poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "Before the boat went down, I mean." "Montana Territory," she replied, wrapping her cold hands around the cup and breathing in the steam. "My uncle has a ranch near Virginia City. He wrote to me after my father died, said he could use some help running the place and that I would be welcome there. I sold everything I had left to buy passage west." "Virginia City is a long way from here," Zachary observed. "You still planning to go?" "I do not have much choice," she admitted. "I have no family back east, no money, no prospects. My uncle is my only remaining relative, and he offered me a home. I have to at least try to reach him." Zachary nodded thoughtfully, stirring the beans in their pot. "The nearest town of any size is Yankton, about 2 days' ride south. You could catch a stagecoach there, head west through Wyoming Territory to Montana. But stage tickets are not cheap, and if you lost everything on that riverboat—" "I have a little money," Olivia said quickly, reaching for the small reticule that still hung from her wrist by its cord. Miraculously, it had stayed with her through the ordeal, though it was waterlogged and stained with river mud. She opened it and counted out the damp bills inside. $30, her emergency fund, meant to see her through any unexpected expenses on her journey. It was all she had left in the world. "That will get you to Montana if you are careful," Zachary said. "But Yankton is still 2 days south, and you cannot make that journey alone on foot, not without supplies or proper clothes. Then, what do you suggest?" she asked, hearing the note of desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts to sound calm. He was quiet for a long moment, ladling beans onto 2 tin plates and handing her one along with a spoon. Then he said, "I am headed northwest myself, driving those cattle I mentioned. My route takes me through Wyoming territory, near the Montana border. If you are willing to ride with me and help out with the camp work, I could see you safely as far as Buffalo, Wyoming. From there, the stage line runs straight to Virginia City. It would save you some money and keep you safer than traveling alone." Olivia stared at him, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "You are offering to let me travel with you, but you do not even know me." "I know you are a woman alone in rough country with no resources and no way to protect yourself," he replied evenly. "I know that leaving you to fend for yourself would be as good as leaving you to die. And I know that I could not live with myself if I did that after pulling you out of that river. Besides, I could use the help. Driving cattle single-handed is no easy task." "I do not know anything about cattle," she confessed. "You can learn. And you can cook, I hope, because my beans get tiresome after a while." There was a hint of humor in his voice, a slight softening around his eyes that transformed his weathered face. She found herself smiling despite everything, despite being stranded in the middle of nowhere wearing a strange man's clothes, despite having lost everything she owned except $30 damp and her life. "I can cook. My mother taught me before she died, though I have not had much opportunity to practice in recent years." "Then we have a bargain," Zachary said, extending his hand across the fire. "You help me with the camp and the cattle, and I will see you safely to Buffalo. Fair enough." She reached out and shook his hand, feeling the rough calluses on his palm, the firm strength of his grip. "Fair enough. And thank you, Mr. Fletcher, truly." "Just Zach," he corrected. "We are going to be traveling companions for the next few weeks. Might as well dispense with formalities." "Then you must call me Olivia," she replied, and felt a strange warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee or the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. They ate their simple meal in companionable silence as the sun set behind the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that took Olivia's breath away. She had never seen such colors, never experienced such vast openness, and despite the terrifying events of the day, she felt something stirring inside her, something that might have been hope or possibility or the first tentative stirrings of freedom. After they had eaten and cleaned the dishes with sand and water from a nearby creek, Zachary showed her how to arrange his spare bedroll near the fire while he would sleep on the other side, a respectful distance away. He banked the coals to keep them burning through the night, then excused himself to check on Buck and give her privacy to settle in. Olivia lay down on the bedroll, wrapped in the wool blanket, and stared up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. There were so many of them, countless diamonds scattered across black velvet, and they seemed close enough to touch. In St. Louis, the city lights and coal smoke had obscured the stars, but here they blazed in their full glory, and she felt suddenly and overwhelmingly small, a tiny speck in an enormous universe. She heard Zachary return and settle into his own bedroll on the far side of the fire. Olivia. He said quietly, "Yes. I just wanted to say you did well today. Not everyone keeps their head in a crisis like that. Your father would have been proud." The unexpected kindness brought tears to her eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. "How do you know about my father?" "You mentioned he died. That takes courage to talk about, especially to a stranger. I lost my own pa 5 years back, so I know something of what it feels like." "I am sorry for your loss," she whispered. "And I for yours. Now get some sleep. We have got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." She closed her eyes and listened to the crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant howl of a coyote. She thought she would never be able to sleep, here in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. But exhaustion claimed her within minutes and pulled her down into deep, dreamless darkness. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the riverboat, the water closing over her head, Zachary's strong hands pulling her to safety. She sat up and found him crouched by the fire, tending a skillet with the same focused attention he brought to everything he did. "Morning," he said without looking up. "There is water heating if you want to wash. Your dress dried overnight, though it is pretty well ruined, I am afraid." She looked and saw her blue traveling dress hanging from a tree branch, stiff with dried mud and badly wrinkled. He was right. It was ruined. The fine fabric she had been so proud of now fit only for rags. But at least it was dry, and she supposed she should put it back on, propriety demanding she wear her own clothes rather than borrowed men's garments. After washing her face and hands in the warm water Zachary provided, she retreated behind the rosebushes again to change. The dress felt strange after the comfort of the loose shirt and trousers, the corset constricting after a night of breathing freely. She did her best to pin up her hair without a mirror or proper pins, using the few hairpins she found still clinging to her tangled curls. When she emerged, Zachary looked her over with a critical eye. "That dress is going to be a problem," he said bluntly. "You cannot ride or work in all those skirts. Do you have anything more practical?" "Everything I owned was on that riverboat," she reminded him. "This is all I have." He nodded slowly. "All right. When we pass through the trading post later today, we will see about getting you some proper trail clothes. Nothing fancy, but functional. I will advance you the money if you need it, and you can pay me back when you reach your uncle." "I could not possibly," she began, but he held up a hand. "Olivia, this is not charity. It is practicality. You cannot help me with the cattle while tripping over your own skirts. Consider it a business expense." Put that way, she could not really argue, though the thought of being further in his debt made her uncomfortable. She had been raised to be independent and self-sufficient, and accepting help did not come naturally to her. But she was beginning to understand that out here, survival sometimes meant swallowing pride and accepting assistance when it was offered. They broke camp with efficient speed, Zachary showing her how to pack the bedrolls and secure the supplies on Buck's saddle. Then they set off northwest, following a barely visible trail through the grasslands. After about an hour they came upon Zachary's small herd of cattle, 20 head grazing peacefully in a shallow valley with a creek running through it. "They are mostly longhorns," Zachary explained as they approached. "Hardy breed, good for driving long distances. I bought them cheap in Nebraska with the last of my savings, planning to sell them in Wyoming where cattle are scarce and prices are high. If all goes well, I will make enough profit to buy a piece of land and start my own ranch." "You want to be a rancher?" Olivia asked, watching the cattle lift their heads as Buck approached. "Always have," he admitted. "Spent the last 10 years working other men's ranches, saving every penny I could. These cattle are my chance to finally work for myself, Build something that is mine. She heard the longing in his voice, the same yearning for a better future that had driven her to leave St. Louis. They were not so different, she realized, both of them chasing dreams across this vast, unforgiving landscape. Getting the cattle moving proved to be more challenging than Olivia had anticipated. The animals were stubborn and easily distracted, wandering off in different directions or stopping to graze despite Zachary's efforts to keep them bunched together. He rode back and forth along the edges of the small herd, calling out to them and using Buck to guide them in the right direction, but it was clearly a job that needed more than one person. "Can I help?" Olivia called out, watching him chase down a particularly stubborn cow that had decided to explore a side canyon. "You ever ridden a horse?" he called back. "A few times, years ago, side saddle." He brought the wayward cow back to the herd, then rode over to where she stood. "Riding herd is different from a gentle trot through a city park," he warned. "But if you are willing to try, I could certainly use another set of eyes. The cattle respect the horse more than they respect people on foot." Her heart was pounding as he dismounted and helped her up into the saddle. Buck was tall, much taller than the docile mare she had ridden as a girl, and sitting astride felt precarious and strange. Zachary adjusted the stirrups for her shorter legs, then handed her the reins. "Keep a firm grip, but do not yank. Buck knows what he is doing. Just guide him gently and trust him. Your job is to watch the far left side of the herd and keep any cattle from wandering off. If one makes a break for it, ride after it and get ahead of it, turn it back toward the group. Buck will do most of the work if you let him." Then he walked away, leaving her alone on the tall horse with 20 head of cattle eyeing her with what she could only interpret as skepticism. Her hands were slick with nervous sweat as she gathered the reins, but Buck stood steady beneath her, patient and calm. "All right, Buck," she murmured. "I hope you know what you are doing, because I certainly do not." The horse flicked an ear back toward her, and she took that as a positive sign. Zachary had walked to the front of the herd and was now leading them forward on foot, using a long stick to guide the lead animals. The rest followed slowly, and Olivia found herself riding alongside, keeping watch on the left flank as instructed. For the first hour, she was tense and nervous, certain she would fall off or that Buck would bolt or that the cattle would stampede. But gradually, as nothing terrible happened, she began to relax into the rhythm of it. Buck responded to the lightest touch on the reins, moving smoothly to intercept wandering cattle, and she found that Zachary had been right. The horse knew his job far better than she did. By midday, when they stopped to rest near a small creek, Olivia was exhausted but also exhilarated. Her back and legs ached from the unaccustomed exercise, but she had successfully kept the herd together, had ridden a horse astride at more than a sedate walk, had done something she would never have imagined herself capable of just 24 hours ago. Zachary helped her dismount, his hands steadying her when her stiff legs nearly gave way. "You did well," he said, and the approval in his voice made her flush with pleasure. "A natural hand with cattle." "Buck did most of the work," she deflected, but she could not help smiling. "Buck is a good horse, but he still needs someone to guide him. You guided him well." He led Buck to the creek to drink, then showed Olivia how to loosen the cinch so the horse could rest comfortably. They ate a cold lunch of hardtack and jerky, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood tree while the cattle grazed nearby. Olivia's dress was dusty and sweat-stained, and she had long since given up trying to keep it clean. Her hair had come loose from its pins again and hung in wild tangles around her face, and her face was surely sunburned despite her attempts to keep her bonnet in place. "You look like you have been through a war," Zachary observed, but there was warmth in his voice, not criticism. "I feel like it," she admitted. "How do you do this day after day? I am exhausted and we have only been moving for a few hours." "You get used to it. Build strength and endurance. Give it a week and this will feel like second nature." He offered her his canteen and she drank gratefully, the water cool and clean. They reached the trading post in late afternoon, a ramshackle collection of buildings clustered around a muddy crossroads. It was not much to look at, but after days on the trail, it seemed like civilization. Zachary arranged for the cattle to be penned in a corral overnight, paying the post owner a small fee, then led Olivia into the trading post's main store. The proprietor was a weathered man in his 50s with a shrewd eye and a ready smile. "Zach Fletcher," he greeted them. "Been a while since you passed through. What can I do for you?" "Need some trail clothes for the lady," Zachary said. "Practical stuff, nothing fancy. Trousers, shirts, a good hat, boots if you have them in her size." The proprietor looked Olivia up and down with frank curiosity but no judgment. "Got some things that might work. Come on back." He led them to a corner of the store where various garments hung from pegs on the wall. Most were men's clothes, but there were a few items clearly made for women who needed to work rather than sit in parlors. Olivia selected 2 simple cotton shirts, a pair of sturdy denim trousers, and a divided riding skirt that would allow her to ride astride while maintaining some semblance of modesty. She also found a pair of boots that fit reasonably well, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun. The total came to $8, more than she had hoped but less than she had feared. Zachary started to reach for his own money, but she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I can pay for this," she said firmly. "I still have the money from my reticule." "You are going to need that money for the stage fare to Montana," he argued, "and I will have it if I am careful. Please, Zach, let me pay my own way where I can." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if you run short, you tell me. No pride-driven foolishness that leaves you stranded. Understood?" "Understood." She paid for the clothes and changed into the trousers and one of the shirts in a back room the proprietor made available. The clothes fit far better than Zachary's borrowed garments had, and the freedom of movement they provided was astonishing. She could walk without her skirts tangling around her legs, could move her arms freely without worrying about tight sleeves, could breathe deeply without a corset constricting her ribs. When she emerged, Zachary's eyes widened slightly, and that unreadable expression crossed his face again. "Better?" he asked. "Much better. Thank you for suggesting it." They bought supplies for the trail, dried beans and coffee and bacon and flour, along with a few other necessities. Then Zachary surprised her by purchasing a used saddle and bridle from the trading post's tack selection. "What is that for?" she asked as he examined the saddle carefully, checking the stitching and leather. "For you. If you are going to ride every day, you need your own saddle. Buck cannot carry us both and do his job properly. I will buy you a horse in the morning from the corral here. Nothing fancy, just something steady and reliable." "Zach, I cannot let you spend your money on me like this," she protested, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "It is not for you, it is for me. I need help moving those cattle, and you cannot help if you do not have a horse. Consider it a business investment, like I said before. When we get to Buffalo, I will sell the horse and saddle, recoup most of the cost." He was being logical again, framing his generosity as practicality, but she was beginning to see through his gruff exterior to the genuinely kind man beneath. He helped people because it was the right thing to do, but he couched his help in practical terms so as not to embarrass them or make them feel like charity cases. It was a thoughtful approach, and she found herself warming to him more with every passing hour. They made camp that night on the outskirts of the trading post, near enough to access the facilities but far enough for privacy. Zachary showed Olivia how to build a proper fire, how to mix flour and water to make simple pan bread, how to fry bacon without burning it. She proved to be a quick study, and soon she was producing meals that were simple but substantially better than his usual bachelor fare. As they sat by the fire after eating, Zachary asked, "What was your life like in St. Louis? Before your father died, I mean." Olivia was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Comfortable, I suppose. My father was a clerk in a shipping office, not wealthy but respectable. We had a small house, enough to eat, a position in society. My mother died when I was 16, and after that it was just my father and me. He taught me to read and write and figure, said women needed education just as much as men. He was a good man." Her voice caught on the last words. "Sounds like he was," Zachary agreed gently. "What happened?" "He got sick last winter, pneumonia. The doctor's bills mounted up, and when he died, I discovered he had borrowed money to pay for the treatments, money against the house. His employer refused to pay his final wages, claimed he owed them for days missed. I sold everything I could, but it was not enough to satisfy the debts. The bank took the house, and I was left with nothing but a few personal items and the $30 I had hidden away for emergencies." "That is when your uncle wrote to you," she nodded. "He is my father's older brother." They had not spoken in years, some old family quarrel I never fully understood. But he read about my father's death in the newspaper and sent me a letter saying I was welcome at his ranch, that family should stick together. It seemed like a miracle at the time, a way out of an impossible situation. "And now you are headed to a place you have never been to live with a man you barely know," Zachary observed. "You think I am foolish?" she asked, meeting his gray eyes across the fire. "No, I think you are brave. Desperate situations call for desperate measures, and you are doing what you have to do to survive. There is no shame in that." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "I did the same thing myself 5 years ago. After my pa died, my older brother inherited the family farm back in Missouri. He made it clear I was not welcome to stay, that he did not want to share the inheritance. So I left with nothing but my saddle and my horse and headed west to make my own way." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Not for a minute. I have had hard times, sure, and there have been days when I wondered if I would survive. But I am free out here, answerable to no one but myself. I work hard and I reap the rewards of that work. When I finally buy my piece of land and build my ranch, it will be mine. Something I created with my own 2 hands. That is worth more than any inheritance." She heard the passion in his voice, the deep-seated need to prove himself and build something lasting. It was not so different from her own dreams, really, the desire to have a place to belong, to be valued for herself and not just as someone's daughter or burden. "I hope you get your ranch," she said sincerely. "You deserve it. And I hope you find what you are looking for in Montana," he replied. "You deserve that too." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the fire burn down to coals. Olivia felt a strange contentment settle over her, despite the uncertainty of her situation. Here, under the vast western sky, with this unexpected cowboy who had saved her life and asked nothing in return, she felt safer than she had in a long time. The next morning, Zachary bought her a horse, a sturdy little bay mare with gentle eyes and a calm temperament. "Her name is Rosie," the corral owner said. "Good trail horse, not spooky, easy keeper." Olivia fell in love with Rosie immediately. The mare nuzzled her hand hopefully, looking for treats, and Olivia laughed and stroked her soft nose. Zachary showed her how to saddle the mare properly, how to adjust the bridle, how to mount and dismount safely. Then they spent an hour in the corral while Olivia practiced riding, getting used to the feel of her own horse beneath her. By mid-morning they were on the trail again, the cattle strung out in a loose line with Zachary at the front and Olivia riding flank on Rosie. The landscape rolled past, endless grass and sky, occasional creeks and canyons. They saw no other travelers that day, just the vast, empty prairie and distant mountains on the western horizon. Over the following days, they fell into a comfortable routine. They rose with the sun, broke camp, moved the cattle through the morning and into early afternoon, then stopped to rest during the hottest part of the day before pushing on until evening. Olivia learned to handle Rosie with confidence, learned to anticipate the cattle's movements, learned which animals were troublemakers and which were docile followers. She also learned about Zachary, picking up details in the conversations they shared during evening meals and around the campfire. He was 26 years old, had worked ranches in Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado. He had no sweetheart waiting for him anywhere, had never stayed in one place long enough to form lasting attachments. He was good with his hands, could fix almost anything, had an encyclopedic knowledge of horses and cattle. He read whenever he could find books, though they were rare on the trail, and he had taught himself basic doctoring skills out of necessity. In turn, she told him about her life in St. Louis, about her mother's love of music and her father's gentle humor, about the books she had read and the small dreams she had harbored before her father's death shattered her comfortable existence. She found it easy to talk to him, easier than it had been to talk to anyone in years. He listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, remembered details she mentioned in passing. One evening, about a week into their journey, they made camp near a small lake that reflected the sunset in shades of fire and gold. After they had eaten and cleaned up, Zachary suggested they walk down to the water's edge. Olivia followed him through the tall grass, her new boots crunching on the sandy shore. "This is beautiful," she breathed, watching the colors ripple across the water's surface. "One of my favorite spots," Zachary admitted. "I have passed through here a few times over the years. Never gets old." They stood side by side in the gathering darkness, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The air was soft and cool, carrying the scent of grass and water and the distant perfume of wild roses. Somewhere nearby, a nightbird sang its liquid song. "Olivia," Zachary said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you afraid?" "Of going to Montana, of living with your uncle, of what you might find there?" She considered the question carefully. "Yes," she admitted. "I am terrified. What if my uncle has changed his mind? What if the ranch is not what he described? What if I cannot adjust to that life? But I am more afraid of going back, of returning to St. Louis with nothing and no prospects. At least moving forward feels like progress, even if I do not know where I will end up." He nodded slowly. "That is a good answer. Fear is not a bad thing if it motivates you to keep trying. It is only dangerous when it paralyzes you." "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of failing, of losing everything you have invested in those cattle?" "Every day," he confessed. "I have put everything I have into this venture. If it fails, I will be starting from nothing again. But like you said, moving forward feels better than standing still, even when you are scared." She turned to look at him, seeing his profile outlined against the darkening sky, the strong lines of his jaw and nose, the slight curl of his dark hair against his collar. He was a handsome man, she realized with a start, though his handsomeness was rough and weathered rather than refined. But more than that, he was a good man, the kind of man who dove into rivers to save strangers and helped them even when it inconvenienced him. "Thank you for this," she said impulsively. for helping me, for treating me with respect, for sharing your journey with me. I know you did not have to do any of it." He turned to meet her eyes, and in the fading light his gray gaze was soft and warm. "You are welcome. And truth be told, I am glad for the company. It gets lonely out here, just me and the cattle. Having someone to talk to, someone who does not just moo back at me, has made this trip better than any I have taken before." She laughed, the sound carrying across the still water. "I promise to keep the mooing to a minimum." "Much appreciated," he said, and his rare smile transformed his face, making him look younger and happier. They walked back to camp together, and Olivia felt something shift between them, some subtle change in the air. She could not name it exactly, but it felt significant, like crossing an invisible threshold into new territory. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of long days and star-filled nights. The landscape changed as they traveled northwest, the flat grasslands giving way to rolling hills and then to more rugged terrain. They crossed rivers and creeks, navigated rocky canyons, pushed through thunderstorms that turned the ground to mud and made the cattle restless and difficult. Through it all, Olivia learned and adapted. She became competent with horses and cattle, could build a fire and cook a meal with minimal supplies, could read the weather and anticipate problems before they arose. Her hands developed calluses, her skin tanned despite the hat. Her body grew lean and strong from the constant physical work. But more than the physical changes, she felt herself transforming inside. The timid city girl who had boarded that riverboat was gone, replaced by someone harder and more confident, someone who could face challenges without dissolving into helpless tears. She had discovered a strength she had not known she possessed, and with it came a growing sense that she could handle whatever lay ahead. She also found herself increasingly drawn to Zachary. She noticed the way his hands looked holding the reins, strong and capable. She noticed the way he moved, with an unconscious grace that came from a lifetime of physical work. She noticed the rare smiles he gave her, the way his eyes warmed when he looked at her, the careful consideration he showed in everything he did. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster, something that spoke of interest and attraction, and perhaps something deeper. One night, as they sat by the fire after a particularly long day, Zachary said, "We should reach Buffalo in about 3 days. You will be able to catch the stage from there to Virginia City." The words should have brought relief, but instead, Olivia felt her stomach drop with unexpected dread. 3 days. Just 3 more days on the trail with him, and then she would board a stagecoach and disappear into her new life with her uncle, and Zachary would go on to sell his cattle and buy his land. Their paths would diverge, and she would likely never see him again. The realization was painful in a way she had not anticipated. "So soon," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Time moves fast on the trail," he replied, but his own voice sounded oddly flat. "You will be glad to have a real bed again, I imagine. Real walls, a roof, regular meals." "I suppose," she said, though in truth she had stopped missing those comforts days ago. She had grown accustomed to sleeping under the stars, to the simple meals they cooked over open fires, to the freedom of life on the trail. Zachary poked at the fire, not meeting her eyes. "Your uncle will be glad to see you. It will be good for you to have family again, people who care about you." "Yes," she agreed, but the word felt hollow. She barely remembered her uncle, had not seen him since she was a small child. He was family in name, but in reality, he was nearly as much a stranger as Zachary had been when they first met. The difference was that now, after weeks on the trail together, Zachary felt like anything but a stranger. He felt like someone she had known her entire life, someone she could trust implicitly, someone she did not want to leave. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Zachary stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses," he muttered, and strode away into the darkness, leaving Olivia alone by the fire. She stared into the flames, her mind churning. When had her feelings for Zachary changed from gratitude to something more? When had his presence become essential to her happiness? She could not pinpoint a single moment. It had been a gradual shift, like the slow turn of seasons, so subtle she had not noticed until it was complete. But now, facing the prospect of parting from him in just 3 days, she could no longer deny what she felt. She had fallen in love with Zachary Fletcher, the quiet cowboy who had pulled her from the river and shown her a new way of living. She loved his steady strength, his dry humor, his unshakable integrity. She loved the way he cared for his animals, the way he treated her as an equal partner rather than a burden, the way his rare smiles made her heart soar. And in 3 days, she would lose him forever. The next morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, and the air felt heavy and oppressive. Zachary studied the sky with a worried frown as they broke camp. "Storm coming," he said. "A bad one by the look of it. We need to find shelter." They pushed the cattle hard, heading for a rock formation Zachary remembered from previous trips. By the time they reached it, the wind had picked up, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. The formation was a cluster of large boulders that created a natural overhang, just big enough for 2 people and their saddles. Zachary secured the horses in a shallow depression that offered some protection from the wind, then herded Olivia under the overhang as the storm broke in earnest. Rain came down in sheets, turning the world gray and obscuring everything more than a few feet away. Thunder rolled across the prairie like artillery fire, and lightning split the sky in blinding white forks. They huddled under the overhang, pressed close together for warmth as the temperature dropped. Olivia was shivering despite her coat, and Zachary wrapped his arms around her, sharing his body heat. She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his chest against her back, the warmth of his breath stirring her hair. The storm raged for hours, wind and rain and thunder that shook the ground. The cattle had scattered, seeking whatever shelter they could find, but there was nothing to be done about it until the storm passed. Zachary held Olivia close, his chin resting on the top of her head, his arms tight around her waist. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Yes," she said, though she was still shivering. "Just cold." He rubbed his hands up and down her arms, trying to generate warmth through friction. "This will pass. Storms always do." She turned in his arms, needing to see his face. They were so close that she could feel his breath on her cheek, could see the concern in his gray eyes. Water dripped from his hat brim, and his shirt was soaked through, but he did not seem to care about his own discomfort, only hers. "Zach," she said, and then stopped, not sure how to continue. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I do not want to go to Montana." The words burst out of her, surprising them both. "I mean, I do not want to leave you. These past weeks, traveling with you, working with you, I have been happier than I have been in years, maybe ever. I know it is foolish. I know we barely know each other really, but I cannot help how I feel." His eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then he said hoarsely, "Olivia, you cannot mean that. You have a chance at a real life with your uncle, security, and a home. I am just a cowboy with 20 head of cattle and a dream. I have nothing to offer you." "You have yourself," she said fiercely, "and that is more than enough. I love you, Zach. I think I have loved you since you pulled me out of that river, or maybe since you gave me your clothes without a second thought, Or maybe since you bought me a horse so I could help you. I do not know when it started, but I know how I feel now. I love you, and I do not want to say goodbye in 3 days. For a long moment he did not move, did not speak. Then, slowly, he raised one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. I love you too, he whispered. I have been fighting it, telling myself I had no right to feel this way, that you deserved better than a drifter with uncertain prospects. But God help me. I love you, Olivia. I love your courage and your determination, and the way you throw yourself into every challenge without complaining. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you look at the stars like you are seeing them for the first time. I love everything about you, and the thought of watching you ride away on that stage has been tearing me apart. She felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Then do not let me go, she pleaded. Ask me to stay. Stay, he said immediately, urgently. Stay with me. I do not have much to offer right now, but I promise I will work every day of my life to give you the home and security you deserve. Marry me, Olivia. Be my wife and my partner and help me build our ranch together. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Zach, I will marry you. He kissed her then, a gentle kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate. She kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, pouring her love and hope and desire into the connection between them. The storm raged around them, but they barely noticed, lost in each other, in the wonder of this unexpected love that had grown between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, the rain had begun to slow. Zachary rested his forehead against hers. We will send a telegram to your uncle when we reach Buffalo, he said. Explain the situation, make sure he understands you are safe and happy. Then we will find a preacher and get married properly. After that, we sell the cattle, buy our land, and start building. That sounds perfect, Olivia said, and kissed him again because she could, because he was hers now and she was his, and the future stretched bright before them. The storm passed, leaving the prairie washed clean and sparkling. They emerged from their shelter to find the cattle scattered but unharmed, and spent the rest of the day rounding them up. It was hard work, but Olivia found herself smiling through it all, catching Zachary's eye across the herd and seeing her own happiness reflected there. 3 days later, they rode into Buffalo, Wyoming, a rough frontier town that had sprung up along the stage route. True to his word, Zachary took Olivia straight to the telegraph office, where they composed a message to her uncle explaining that she had met and fallen in love with a rancher, and would be settling in Wyoming instead of continuing to Montana. They assured him she was safe and well, thanked him for his generous offer, and sent their best wishes. Then they found the local preacher, a kindly older man who agreed to marry them that very afternoon. They had no rings, no fancy clothes, no guests, but none of that mattered. Olivia wore her simple trail clothes and held a bunch of wildflowers Zachary had picked from the prairie. He stood beside her in his cleanest shirt, his dark hair slicked back, his gray eyes shining with love and happiness. You, Zachary Fletcher, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The preacher asked. I do, Zachary said firmly, his hand warm and strong around hers. And do you, Olivia Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Olivia replied, her voice steady and sure. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Zachary cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. She kissed him back, this man who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it, who had shown her strength she did not know she possessed, and love she had never dared to hope for. When they pulled apart, the preacher was beaming. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher. May God bless your union with many happy years together." They spent their wedding night in Buffalo's only hotel, a luxury after weeks of sleeping on the ground. But even more wonderful than the soft bed and real walls was the joy of holding each other through the night, of waking up together as husband and wife, of knowing they would face every future morning side by side. The next morning, Zachary sold his cattle to a local rancher for a good price, making a substantial profit on his investment. With that money, plus Olivia's remaining savings which she insisted on contributing, they had enough to buy a modest piece of land about 10 miles outside Buffalo. It was good grazing land with a creek running through it, backed by hills that would provide shelter from winter storms. They spent the summer building their ranch from the ground up. Zachary constructed a small cabin while Olivia planted a vegetable garden and worked on making their new home comfortable. They bought a few head of cattle and some chickens, laying the foundation for the ranch they planned to grow over the coming years. It was hard work, harder than anything Olivia had done even on the trail, but she threw herself into it with determination and joy. This was their dream taking shape, their future being built with their own hands. Every nail Zachary hammered, every seed Olivia planted, was an investment in the life they were creating together. They had help from neighboring ranchers, who came to assist with the cabin raising and offered advice on everything from well digging to predator control. The frontier community welcomed them, and Olivia found herself making friends among the other ranch wives, women who understood the challenges and rewards of this hard life. By fall, their cabin was complete, snug and weathertight with a good fireplace and glass windows. Their garden had produced a bountiful harvest, which Olivia preserved for the coming winter. Their small herd had grown slightly with the addition of calves, and they had plans to buy more cattle in the spring. On their first anniversary, Zachary surprised Olivia by presenting her with a simple gold ring he had bought in Buffalo. "I should have had this for you at our wedding," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "But better late than never." "It is perfect," Olivia assured him, admiring the way the gold gleamed in the lamplight. "Everything is perfect." And it was. They had their ranch, their home, and most importantly, they had each other. The following spring brought a new joy when Olivia discovered she was expecting their first child. Zachary was over the moon, already planning additions to the cabin, and talking about teaching their son or daughter to ride as soon as they could walk. Their son was born in December of 1882, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark curls. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's father, and he was the light of both their lives. Olivia had never known it was possible to love so deeply, to feel such overwhelming tenderness for this tiny person they had created together. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, their herd increasing, their land becoming more productive. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere and charmed everyone he met. In 1884, they welcomed a daughter, Emma, completing their family. Zachary proved to be as good a father as he was a husband, patient and loving with his children while still maintaining the discipline necessary to raise them right. He taught Samuel to ride when the boy was barely 3, and even little Emma seemed fearless around the horses and cattle. Olivia watched her family grow with a heart full of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to that river, to the cowboy who had saved her life, and then given her a reason to cherish it. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the chores done, Zachary and Olivia would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the prairie. Sometimes they talked, sharing the events of the day or making plans for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, content in each other's presence. "You ever think about that day?" Zachary asked one evening. "When the riverboat went down, sometimes," Olivia admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. And then I think about you jumping in after me, pulling me out, changing the entire course of my life." "Best decision I ever made," he said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Though I have to say, you changed my life just as much. I was so focused on building something for myself. I never stopped to think about building it with someone. You taught me that everything is better when you share it with the person you love." "We taught each other," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And we will keep teaching each other for the rest of our lives." Years passed, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they worried about losing cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low and the grass turned brown. There were illnesses and injuries, setbacks and disappointments. But through it all, they faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. Their children grew up strong and healthy, learning the ways of the ranch from their parents. Samuel inherited his father's quiet strength and love of horses, while Emma had her mother's determination and quick mind. They were both educated at the small school that had been established in Buffalo, but their real education came from the land and the animals and the hard work of ranch life. By 1890, the Fletcher Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the area. They ran several hundred head of cattle, had good relationships with buyers in Cheyenne and even back east, and had built a reputation for quality livestock and fair dealing. Zachary had achieved his dream of being his own boss, of building something lasting and valuable. But more than the success of the ranch, more than the financial security they had achieved, what mattered most to both Zachary and Olivia was the life they had built together. They had created a home filled with love and laughter, had raised children who would carry on their values and their work ethic, had proven that love could not only survive in the harsh Western landscape, but thrive there. On their 10th anniversary, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, inviting all their neighbors and friends. The cabin had been expanded over the years and could now comfortably accommodate a crowd. Olivia prepared a feast with help from the other ranch wives, while Zachary and the men set up tables outside under the cottonwood trees. As the evening wore on and the children played games while the adults talked and laughed, Zachary pulled Olivia aside for a private moment. They walked down to the creek, to the spot where they liked to sit and watch the water flow past. 10 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both, Olivia agreed. I can still remember exactly how I felt when you pulled me out of that river, the relief and gratitude. But I also cannot imagine my life without you in it, as though we were always meant to be together. We were, he said firmly. I am convinced of it. That riverboat did not hit those shallows by accident. It was fate bringing us together, giving us both a second chance at happiness. She smiled and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Then, I am grateful to fate. And I am grateful to you for being the kind of man who jumps into rivers to save strangers, who gives without expecting anything in return, who loves with his whole heart. He held her close, his chin resting on top of her head just as it had during that storm so many years ago. I love you, Olivia Fletcher, today, tomorrow, and for all the rest of our days. And I love you, Zachary Fletcher, always and forever. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the life they had built, their children's laughter floating on the evening breeze. The prairie stretched around them, vast and beautiful and full of promise, and they knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. Together in this wild and wonderful place they now called home. The years continued to unfold, bringing grandchildren and new generations to carry on the Fletcher name and legacy. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming a landmark in the region. Samuel eventually took over the daily operations, while Zachary and Olivia moved into a smaller house they built near the creek, their favorite spot on the property. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family nearby, keeping them surrounded by the people they loved. Zachary and Olivia grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands weathered by decades of hard work. But their love never diminished, never faded. If anything, it grew richer and deeper with time, seasoned by shared experiences and mutual respect, and the simple joy of waking up each morning beside the person who made life worth living. On quiet evenings, they still sat by the creek and watched the water flow past, holding hands just as they always had. Sometimes they talked about the old days, remembering the riverboat and the trail drive and those early years of building the ranch from nothing. Sometimes they talked about their children and grandchildren, marveling at how quickly time had passed and how blessed they had been. And sometimes they simply sat in silence, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. True love that had endured every challenge, overcome every obstacle, and created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The cowboy who had jumped into the river to save a stranger had found his home, and the woman he had rescued had discovered a strength and happiness she had never known she could possess. Together, they had built more than a ranch. They had built a life worth living, a love worth celebrating, and a story that would be told by their descendants for generations to come. From the moment Zachary had pulled Olivia from the Missouri River on that fateful day in 1881, their fates had been intertwined, two souls meant to find each other in the vastness of the American West. And they lived happily ever after, their love a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and the unexpected miracles that can arise from tragedy. The riverboat had stranded her, but the cowboy had made sure she got to safety first, and in doing so had given them both the greatest gift of all, a love that would last a lifetime and beyond.